Rain is rare in Orlando this time of year, but today it poured like a bucket. The sky mourned my father with me. Walter Fort, the man who taught me everything I know about life and business, now lay in a wooden box, ready to go underground forever. I stood under a black umbrella, feeling the water still seeping through my shoes. My eyes were dry, all the tears I had cried in the past 3 days. Now all that was left was emptiness and a dull ache somewhere deep inside. The priest was saying some words that passed my consciousness. I looked at the faces around me, my father's business partners, the employees of our chain of Fort Hospitality mini hotels, family friends, and, of course, her, Agatha Pym, my stepmother of the past 3 years, standing on the other side of the casket. Immaculate black suit, perfect hair, not a single tear. Only her slightly trembling hands gave away that something was going on inside her. Grief? I doubt it. More like excitement at the prospect of my father's death. When the ceremony was over, people started coming up to me, offering condolences. Darla Fenn, the Human Resources Director, gave me a big hug. "Meryl, if you need anything, just call, any time of the day or night," she whispered in my ear. I nodded, grateful for the encouragement. Darla had worked with her father since the beginning, when Fort Hospitality was just one small hotel on the outskirts of town. Ethan Wood, her father's old friend and investor, approached next. A tall man with graying temples put his hand on my shoulder. "Walter would be proud of you, Meryl. You're as strong as he is." "I'm not sure I feel strong right now," I admitted honestly. "That will come. In the meantime, remember you have friends." He looked at me meaningfully, as if trying to convey some kind of thought. I glanced at Ethan as he headed toward the cemetery exit. He stopped next to Agatha on the way, saying a few words to her. Her face contorted for a moment, but quickly returned to the familiar mask of a grieving widow. The people gradually dispersed. I stayed at the grave alone, remembering. I was 10 when my father took me to the office for the first time. He sat me down at his huge desk and let me count the receipts. "You see, Meryl, every bill, every number is a story about a person who stayed at our hotel. It's our job to make those stories better." At 12, I was already helping out at the front desk during school vacations. At 16, I knew all about booking rooms, guest complaints, and ordering supplies. By 21, having graduated from college with a degree in hotel management, I was actually managing the day-to-day operations at 2 of our 5 hotels. My father never gave me any indulgences, but he never hid his pride either. "You're going to be a better manager than me," he often said. And then Agatha came along. They met at some business conference. 6 months later, they were married, quickly, and without much pomp. I tried to accept her for my father's sake. He seemed happy, and that was the main thing. Agatha was polite but distant. She wasn't hostile, but she didn't try to get closer. It suited us both. I continued to work for the company. She continued to play the role of a successful businessman's wife. When my father had his first heart attack 8 months ago, something changed. Agatha became more interested in the business. She started showing up at meetings, asking questions about the structure of the company, how decisions were made. "She's just worried about the future," my father explained when I voiced my concerns. I backed off then. Maybe she really is worried? Maybe I'm too suspicious? The second attack happened a month ago. My father was gone. And now I stood over his grave, trying to realize that I would never again hear his laughter, get his advice, or see his proud smile. "Miss Fort, you have to go. It's starting to rain." The cemetery guard gently touched my shoulder. I nodded and slowly walked toward the exit. There was still a memorial meeting ahead at the company's main office. I felt devastated, but I knew I had to be there. For my father's sake. For the sake of the people who had worked with him and were now looking at me. People had already gathered in the office. Soft conversations, wine glasses, appetizers. Death is furnished with such strange rituals. I noticed Agatha standing surrounded by Noel Basque, our CFO, and a couple other people I didn't know. They were chatting animatedly about something, but the conversation broke off abruptly as I approached. "Meryl, dear, you need to rest. You look so pale." Agatha tried to feign concern, but there was impatience in her eyes. "I'm fine," I replied briefly. "What were you two talking about?" "Oh, just discussing some organizational matters." Noel interjected. Nothing urgent. I wanted to ask more. But at that moment, Darla approached us with a suggestion that we give a speech in memory of my father. The next hour passed in memories of Walter Forty. People told stories, funny, touching, inspiring. I sat and listened and thought about how many lives my father had touched. When the formal part was over, I noticed that Agatha, Noel, and the same strange men had disappeared into the conference room. Something about their behavior made me tense. I waited a few minutes, and after making sure no one was looking, I headed towards the conference room door. Legally, it's completely clean, I heard the voice of one of the strangers say. The prenup is worded so that 51% of the shares go to you, Mrs. Fort. What about the daughter? It was Noel's voice. She has 20% as before, but without a controlling interest, she won't be able to block our decisions, Agatha replied. And when do you plan to inform her? The sooner the better. There's no point in procrastinating. I backed away from the door, feeling the blood drain from my face. 51%? That's impossible. Dad always said that the controlling interest would be mine when the time came, that he'd thought of everything, that the future of the company was in my hands. But I guess he didn't have Agatha Pym in mind. I went back to the main hall, trying to keep my composure. Think, Meryl, think. I need to find out if what I heard is true. I need to check the paperwork. Talk to my father's lawyers. I spent the next 3 days trying to figure out the legalities. Turns out that a month before he died, my father had indeed changed his will. And yes, Agatha was now the controlling shareholder. I was stunned. Why? Why would he do that? It wasn't like the father I knew. Something didn't add up. The 4th day after the funeral, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. I had some more paperwork to go through, and I wanted to do it before Agatha showed up, but she was already there, sitting at my father's desk, my future desk, I always thought, looking like she'd always sat there. Meryl, it's good of you to come, she said, pointing to the chair across from me. We need to talk. I remained standing. About what? About your future, and the future of the company. Noel and another man entered the room, apparently the same lawyer I'd heard in the conference room. This is Mr. Hatch, our new corporate lawyer, Agatha introduced him. Ours? I interjected. Yes, ours. Fort Hospitality Company. She straightened in her chair. Meryl, I realize this isn't the best time, but business can't wait. Your father has entrusted me with the leadership of the company, and I intend to honor his trust. My father wanted me to run the company, I said firmly. He's been preparing me for this my whole life. Perhaps he used to, Mr. Hatch interjected. But Mr. Fort's last will is clearly stated in his will. The controlling interest is vested in Mrs. Fort. This is some kind of mistake, or a forgery. I felt a wave of anger rising inside. Agatha sighed with feigned sympathy. I understand your frustration, dear, but facts are facts. I now own a controlling interest, and as the new CEO, I have to inform you that your services are no longer required. What? I couldn't believe my ears. You're firing me from my father's company? Restructuring, Noel interjected businesslike. We're optimizing the management structure. That's completely absurd. I raised my voice. I know this business better than anyone. I grew up in it. Unfortunately, that creates a conflict of interest, Mr. Hatch observed dryly. Your emotional attachment to the company may interfere with necessary business decisions. I shifted my gaze to Agatha. She was looking at me without a shadow of sympathy, with a slight smile of superiority. That's what you've been pushing for all along, isn't it? I asked quietly. Is that why you married him? To get the company? For a moment, something flashed in her eyes. Guilt? Irritation? But it quickly disappeared. Don't be silly, Meryl. I loved your father. But now I need to think about the future, about my future. You have no right to do that. I do, and the paperwork proves it. She nodded to Mr. Hatch, who laid a folder of papers on the table. Here are all the details of your severance package. Quite generous, I should point out. You keep your 20% equity, of course, but the management decisions are now made by me. I grabbed the folder without even opening it. "This isn't over," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "Oh, I think it is exactly over." Agatha leaned back in her chair. "Get out of here, Meryl. You have an hour to gather your personal belongings." I wanted to throw her something harsh back at her, but held back. Not here. Not now. Turning around, I walked out of the office, barely holding back tears of rage. In my, now former, office, I mechanically packed my things into a cardboard box. Photos, notepads, a mug with the logo of the chain's first hotel. 7 years of work fit into one box. It didn't seem real. There was a quiet knock on the door. Darla. "I heard," she said simply. "It's not fair." "Life isn't fair." I grinned bitterly. "I should have seen something like this coming. I should have protected my father's legacy." "You couldn't have known." Darla stepped closer. Agatha played her part well. Even Walter didn't see through her. So now what? She's going to destroy everything he's built. Perhaps, Darla was quiet. Or perhaps all is not yet lost. I looked up at her. "What do you mean?" "Not here," she said quietly, glancing at the door. "Call me tonight." I nodded, grateful for that glimmer of hope. Finishing packing, I took one last look around the office I considered my second home and walked out without looking back. A security guard stopped me in the parking lot. Another humiliating moment in this horrible day. He checked the contents of the box, made sure I wasn't carrying anything of value, and only then let me leave. Getting into the car, I didn't start the engine right away. I stared at the building where I grew up, where I learned business from the best teacher there could ever be, my father. "I'll be back," I whispered, gripping the steering wheel to white knuckles. "I swear, Dad, I'll come back and fix this." I started the car and drove out of the parking lot, leaving a part of my life behind, but not forever. I spent the first week after my layoff in a daze. I woke up every morning feeling like it was all just a bad dream, and now I'd get up, drive to the office, and my father would greet me with his usual smile. Then reality would come crashing down on me all over again. I was renting a small apartment near downtown Orlando, always thinking it was a temporary place to live until I took my father's place and bought something more substantial. Now the apartment seemed foreign to me, but I didn't want to leave it. It held memories of conversations I'd had with my father and my plans for the future of the company. On the 8th day, I forced myself to leave the house. I had to look for a job. I wasn't going to spend the severance pay Agatha had given me. I could use it for something more important. A call from Darla found me at the cafe on the corner of my street, where I was looking at job openings in the hospitality industry. "Meryl, how are you?" Her voice sounded concerned. "I've been better," I answered honestly, "but I'm doing okay." "There's news. Agatha has scheduled an extraordinary board meeting in a month. She's going to present a new strategy for the company." "What strategy?" "It's not clear yet, but I heard that she plans to sell our 2 hotels and invest in some new project." I felt everything inside clench. Dad would never sell those hotels. They were the chain's first, its heart. "Do you have any ideas on how to stop this?" Darla asked. "Not yet, no, but I'm working on it." It was a lie. In reality, I had no idea what to do. My 20% stake didn't give me the right to block Agatha's decisions. After the call, I sat staring into the void for a long time. Then I resolutely closed the laptop. It was time to act. I started with the most obvious thing. I made a list of all the hotels in Orlando where I could try to get a job. I called 3 places, but they all required references from previous jobs. I doubted Agatha or Noel, who'd sold out to her, would give me a positive reference. On the 4th call, I got lucky. The Lakeside Lodge, a small family-run hotel on the shores of Lake Iola, a mid-priced competitor of our chain, was looking for a receptionist. The owner, Mr. Harris, agreed to a same-day interview. The interview turned out to be unexpectedly pleasant. Mr. Harris, a full man in his 50s with a good-natured face, recognized me immediately. "Miss Fort, I had the pleasure of speaking with your father several times at city business forums. He was a fine man." "Thank you," I tried to smile. "Yes, he was the best." Mr. Harris looked at me carefully. "If it's no secret, why are you looking for a job? I've heard about the changes in the management of your company, but I thought you were staying there." I decided to be blunt. The new majority owner, my stepmother, found my presence undesirable. "How silly," Mr. Harris shook his head. "Your father always said you were the future of Fort Hospitality." "Plans have changed," I shrugged, trying to look more indifferent than I really was. Mr. Harris was silent, as if making a decision. "Look, Miss Fort, I'm going to be honest with you. You are no doubt overqualified for the position of regular administrator, and I admit, I'm a little concerned that you might use the knowledge you've gained from us to compete." "I understand your concerns," I nodded. "But I can give you my word that I won't use the information against you. I just need a job while I deal with some things." Something in my look apparently convinced him. "All right, Miss Fort. You're accepted. When can you start?" "As soon as tomorrow." "Great. I'll see you at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning for the paperwork." I left Lakeside Lodge with conflicting feelings. On the one hand, I now had a job, not my dream job, but still. On the other, it felt like a step backwards. For 7 years I'd worked in management positions, and now I'd be greeting guests at the front desk. "It's temporary," I reminded myself. "It's all temporary." A surprise awaited me at home. A message from Ethan Wood, an old friend of my father's, was flashing on my answering machine. "Meryl, it's Ethan. I need to talk to you. It's important. Call me as soon as you can." I immediately dialed his number. "Ethan, it's Meryl." "Meryl, thanks for calling me back. How are you holding up?" Trying not to break down. "I heard what happened. It's outrageous." "Yeah." I didn't know what else to say. "Look, we need to meet, not over the phone. When are you free?" "I start a new job tomorrow, but I can meet tonight." "Great. You know Olivia's restaurant on Central Avenue, 7 o'clock at night?" "I'll be there." I hung up the phone, feeling hope awaken inside. Ethan wasn't just a friend of my father's. He was an experienced investor who specialized specifically in the hotel business. If anyone could help me get my company back, it was him. My first day at Lakeside Lodge went better than I expected. Mr. Harris proved to be an attentive boss, and the coworkers were friendly. No one emphasized my background, though I could sense their curiosity. The receptionist's job was familiar. I'd started out that way at my father's hotels, checking reservations, greeting guests, solving minor problems. It was calming and distracted me from my heavy thoughts. At 7 in the evening, I was already sitting at a table in Olivia, a small, cozy restaurant with Italian cuisine. Ethan showed up exactly at the appointed time, as elegant as ever in his gray suit. "Meryl," he hugged me warmly, "you've lost weight." "A little," I smiled. "Stress." We ordered, and it wasn't until the waiter stepped away that Ethan leaned over to me. "I found out something about your stepmother's deal with Walter." I tensed. "And what's that?" "There are certain inconsistencies. You see, your father was a friend of mine for over 20 years. We often discussed his plans for the company, and as recently as last year, he told me that he was going to give you a controlling interest as soon as you were ready." "I know," I nodded. "He told me that too. Anyway, after he died, I was surprised to learn about the will. That doesn't sound like Walter." "I didn't think so either. But a will is a will. It's notarized." Ethan shook his head. I made inquiries. The notary who notarized the document is one Gerald Beaver. And you know what's interesting? He's never worked with your father before this incident, but he had ties to the company Agatha used to work for. I felt my heart beat faster. "You think the will is forged?" "Not necessarily forged. Probably drawn up under duress or in a state where Walter didn't fully realize the consequences. Remember he had blood pressure problems before he died? He was on heavy medication." Yes, I remembered. In recent weeks, my father had often seemed distracted, complaining of dizziness. "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "Can I contest the will?" Ethan shook his head cautiously. "It's a long and complicated process. Without direct evidence of fraud, the chances are slim. But," he looked at me meaningfully, "there is another way." "Which is?" "Buy out the controlling interest, or gather enough shares to block Agatha's decisions." I grinned bitterly. "I don't have that kind of money, Ethan. Not even close." "I have," he said simply. I stared at him, not believing my ears. You want to invest in me? In you and in memory of your father, Ethan nodded. Walter was more than just a friend. We started in this business together. He helped me when I was a nobody. Now it's my turn to help his daughter. I didn't know what to say. This was unbelievable. But there are conditions, Ethan continued. First, it's not a charity. I'll set up an investment fund and you'll manage it. Real money, real risks. I understand. Second, we need to act quickly and quietly. If Agatha finds out about our plans, she can take steps to protect herself. What kind of steps? Such as trying to sell shares to an investor friendly to her, or amending the company's articles of incorporation to make a takeover more difficult. I nodded. What should I do? For starters, research the current stock distribution. Who besides you and Agatha own shares in the company? What are their sentiments? Who might sell us their shares? I have access to the shareholder register, I said thoughtfully. Or rather, you used to, but I think Darla might be able to help. Darla Fenn, the Director of Human Resources? Can she be trusted? Absolutely. She's loyal to her father and the company. Good. You start with that. In the meantime, I'll prepare the necessary paperwork to set up the foundation. We discussed a few more details, and as dinner drew to a close, I felt, for the first time in a long time, that I had a plan. A real plan to get back what was rightfully mine. Thank you, Ethan, I said sincerely as we left the restaurant. I don't know how to thank you enough. Take the company back and run it the way your father wanted, he replied. That would be the best thanks. For the next 2 weeks, I lived in constant stress mode. I worked at Lakeside Lodge during the day and met with Ethan and Darla in the evenings, gathering information and strategizing. Darla, at the risk of her job, provided me with a complete shareholder register. In addition to Agatha's controlling interest, 51%, and my 20%, the remaining 29% was divided among 15 minority shareholders. Most of them were longtime partners of my father's, who had received the shares as a thank you for their help in the early stages of the company's development. We need to gather at least another 20%, Ethan said, as he studied the list. Then we'll have a blocking stake. And if it's more? I asked. If we can get 31%, that's even better. Combined with your 20%, that would give us a controlling interest. It sounded almost unrealistic, but I was ready to fight. Ethan and I compiled a list of potential sellers among the minority shareholders and got to work. I met with each one in person, in cafes, parks, even supermarket parking lots. I told them about Agatha's plans to sell the hotels, about how it conflicted with my father's vision, about my intention to put the company back on the right track. Reactions varied. Some immediately refused, fearing conflict with Agatha or simply not wanting to get involved. Others listened with interest, but asked for time to think about it. Still others agreed, but quoted prices above the market. At the same time, Ethan created an investment fund, Fort Revival, and contributed the initial capital, $2 million. According to our calculations, this should have been enough to buy out the necessary number of shares, if we could agree on a reasonable price. I became the managing director of the fund, a formality necessary for the legal integrity of the transactions, but it was a role that filled me with pride and responsibility. Ethan had entrusted me with real money, and I couldn't let him down. By the end of the second week, we had our first successes. 3 minority shareholders agreed to sell their shares, totaling 7%. The transactions were done through shell companies, so as not to attract Agatha's attention. But that wasn't enough. We needed at least 13% more, and the extraordinary board meeting was less than 2 weeks away. The breakthrough came out of the blue. I met with Frederick Neal, the owner of 5% of the shares and an old friend of my father's. He had refused to meet twice before, and I had almost given up hope. We were sitting in his country home, and once again I was stating my position. Mr. Neal, you knew my father better than most. You realize he would never approve of selling hotels. This is his legacy, his life. Frederick was silent for a long time, looking at the picture on the wall, him and my father at the opening of the first Fort Hospitality Hotel. You know, Merrill, he finally said. Your father was very proud of you, always saying, my Meryl will surpass me one day, and I believed him. Thank you, I said quietly. When I found out that the controlling interest had gone to that your stepmother, I was amazed. That doesn't sound like the Walter I knew. I think so too. Frederick stood up and walked to the window. I'm not selling you my stock, Meryl. My heart dropped. Another rejection. But, he turned to me, I'll put them in trust for you, with the right to vote at board meetings. I couldn't believe my ears. You? Are you serious? Absolutely. I don't want to sell my share. Those shares have sentimental value to me, but I want you to use them to restore justice. It was an unexpected turn, but a very favorable one for us. With Frederick's 5% and the 7% already purchased, we had 12, still not enough for a blocking stake, but close. Encouraged by this success, I stepped up my efforts. The next days turned into a marathon of meetings and negotiations. I slept 4 hours a night, balancing work at the hotel, managing the fund, and secret negotiations with the shareholders. Ethan didn't sit idle either. He used his connections in financial circles to gather information about Agatha's plans. It turned out she was negotiating with a major hotel chain to sell not 2, but 3 Fort Hospitality hotels. She wants to make a quick profit, Ethan explained. Sell the assets, cash out, and possibly go out of business altogether. This news only strengthened my resolve. I couldn't allow the destruction of what my father had spent his entire life building. 3 days before the board meeting, our efforts finally bore fruit. 2 more minority shareholders agreed to sell their shares, and 1 agreed to put them in trust, as did Frederick. In total, that gave us another 9%. 21%, Ethan calculated. Combined with your 20, that's 41. Enough for a blocking stake. I exhaled a sigh of relief. We'll be able to block the sale of the hotels. Yes, but that's only the first step, Ethan reminded me. For full control, we need more. 1 step at a time, I smiled. First we save the hotels, then we get the company back. Legal formalities remain to be settled. Ethan and I met with his attorney to draw up all the necessary paperwork to vote at the board meeting. There's a subtle point, said the lawyer, an older man with an attentive gaze. According to the company's bylaws, a shareholder must be registered in the register at least 2 days before the meeting to be eligible to vote. So, we have to finalize all transactions tomorrow, Ethan clarified. That's exactly right. We worked through the night, executing paperwork, transferring money, registering changes to the shareholder register. By morning, everything was ready. The Fort Revival Foundation officially owned 12% of Fort Hospitality, with another 9% held in trust. Now we need to get ready for the meeting, Ethan said, as we, exhausted but satisfied, walked out of the lawyer's office. Agatha won't be happy to see you there. Let her get used to it, I replied, because I'm not going anywhere. I spent the next day preparing for the meeting. I studied the company's financial reports, which I had managed to get through Darla, analyzed the performance of the hotels that Agatha planned to sell, made alternative proposals for business development. In the evening, Darla called, Meryl, I have news. Agatha is furious. She found out about the changes in the shareholder register. How? I don't know, but she's been calling the lawyers, yelling at Noel. I guess they didn't expect this development. What did she say? That she'd find a way to block you from attending the meeting, that you had no right to interfere. I grinned. Let her try. I have every legitimate reason to be there. Be careful, Meryl. She's really pissed off. After Darla's call, I called Ethan and told him about Agatha's reaction. Not surprising, he said. But legally there's nothing she can do. We acted within the law. I know, but she can come up with something at the meeting. We'll be ready, Ethan replied confidently. We have the advantage that she doesn't know about Frederick and the others' stock trust. She thinks you only have 32% your 20 and the 12 you bought. That was our trump card. Agatha probably thought she could hold her judgment with 51% against our supposed 32%. She didn't know that realistically we controlled 41%. The night before the meeting, I hardly slept at all. I ran through possible scenarios in my head, prepared my arguments, rehearsed my speech. In the morning, I called Mr. Harris and asked for the day off, for the first time since starting at Lakeside Lodge. "Sure, Meryl," he immediately agreed. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, it's just, big day." "Good luck," he said, and I sensed he had a clue what it was about. I put on my best business suit, dark blue, austere but elegant. My father always said, "Dress like you already hold the position you aspire to." Today I was going to look like the CEO of Fort Hospitality. Ethan picked me up at 10 in the morning. The meeting was scheduled for 11. "Ready?" he asked as I got into his car. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, even though everything inside was shaking with excitement. On the way, we went over the strategy one more time. I would be speaking on behalf of the Fort Revival Foundation as its managing director. Ethan will speak as an advisor. Our goal is to block the decision to sell the hotels and propose an alternative development plan. "Remember," Ethan said as we pulled up to the company's office, "you have every right to be there. Don't let them intimidate you." I nodded, feeling the adrenaline start to surge in my blood. "I am my father's daughter," I said, "and today I'm going to prove it." The morning before the board of directors was surprisingly calm. I expected to be shaking with nerves, but instead I felt oddly confident. Maybe it was because Ethan and I had sat up until 3 in the morning double-checking every detail of our plan, or maybe it was because I was finally doing what I should have been doing all along, fighting for my father's legacy. We put the finishing touches on our preparations at a small cafe near Fort Hospitality's headquarters. I didn't want to show up at the building early. The element of surprise was on our side. "Let's go through the paperwork one more time," I said, laying out the folders of trust deeds and shareholder register extracts on the table. Ethan methodically went through the papers, checking every signature, every seal. "Everything's in order. Legally, we're fully protected." "What about your performance?" he asked, watching me reread my notes for the third time. "Done." I looked up from the papers. "Though, to be honest, I'm not sure I'll strictly follow the plan. It'll all depend on Agatha's reaction." "Improvisation is good," Ethan nodded. "Your father rarely stuck to prepared speeches either. He had a knack for sensing his audience. The mention of my father gave me an extra pang of determination. I imagined the way he was looking at me now with approval, with pride. This wasn't just a battle for the business, it was a battle for his legacy, for his dream. At 10:30, we paid and headed toward the office. At the entrance to the building, I froze for a moment, looking at the familiar Fort Hospitality logo above the doors. I had once considered this place my second home. Now it was up to me to conquer it anew. "Remember, Meryl," Ethan said quietly as we rode up in the elevator, "Agatha's going to try to trip you up. Don't let your emotions take over." "I know," I nodded. "Business, not personal." "Exactly. Although in this case," he smiled slightly, "it's both business and personal." The elevator stopped at the 5th floor where the conference room was located. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and stepped out, clutching my briefcase of documents tightly. In the hallway, we ran into Darla. Her eyes widened in surprise even though she knew of our plans. "Meryl, you really came," she whispered, quickly looking over her shoulder. "Everyone's already gathered. Agatha looks tense. I think she suspects something." "Let her suspect," I smiled. "She'll know for sure soon enough." Darla shifted nervously from foot to foot. "I should warn, she's brought in extra security. Allegedly for security, but I think she wants to be able to kick me out if she needs to," I finished for her. "Thanks for the warning, but it's not a problem. I have a legal right to attend this meeting." Ethan and I exchanged glances. It made things more complicated, but it didn't change our plans. "Good luck," Darla whispered and hurried into the conference room. We gave her a moment to take her seat and headed out following. There was indeed a guard standing at the door, a stout man in a dark suit with an earpiece. He gave us an assessing look. "Your names?" "Ethan Wood, visiting consultant." Ethan replied calmly, holding out his ID. The guard checked the list and nodded. "Come on in, Mr. Wood." Then he turned to me. "And you are?" "Meryl Fort, Managing Director of Fort Revival Investment Fund, a 32% shareholder in Fort Hospitality," I said clearly, holding out the shareholder's statement. The guard looked puzzled. Apparently Agatha hadn't alerted him to this possibility. He hesitantly took the document, studied it, then touched his earpiece, apparently requesting instructions. "One moment, please." I waited patiently, mentally preparing myself for a confrontation. A few seconds later, the conference room door swung open, and Noel Busk, the company's CFO, appeared on the doorstep. "What's going on here?" he asked, shifting his gaze from me to the security guard. "I have documents proving my eligibility to attend the meeting." I held out the same statement to him. Noel quickly looked over the papers, his face visibly pale. That's impossible. When did you have time?" "It's all legal, Mr. Busk," Ethan interjected. "The Fort Revival Foundation is officially registered as a shareholder in the company." Noel looked confused. He clearly didn't know what to do. "I should let Mrs. Fort know," he finally uttered. "Of course," I nodded. "In the meantime, we'll go in. The meeting has already begun, hasn't it?" Without waiting for an answer, I stepped forward decisively, past the hesitant guard, and entered the conference room. The reaction was instantaneous. All conversations fell silent, all heads turned in my direction. 10 people around an oval table, board members, key managers, lawyers, and of course Agatha, sitting at the head of the table in my father's seat. Her face contorted with surprise and anger when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked sharply, rising from her seat. I smiled the calmest of smiles. "Hello, Mrs. Fort. I'm here as a representative of the Fort Revival Investment Fund, which owns a significant stake in the company." Noel, who had followed us in, hurried over to Agatha and said something quietly in her ear, holding out my papers. I watched her expression change from anger to confusion, then to poorly concealed anxiety. "There's been some kind of mistake," she finally uttered, addressing the audience. "Miss Fort is no longer associated with the company. She has been dismissed." "As an employee, yes," I replied calmly. "But I remain a shareholder, and now I'm also representing the Fort Revival Foundation, which has acquired an additional 12% of the stock." A surprised whisper ran through the room. I took advantage of the moment and, without waiting for an invitation, took an empty seat at the table. Ethan sat next to me. Agatha seemed to be trying to quickly assess the situation. I saw her lean over to the lawyer sitting next to her, asking him something. The man, after looking over the documents, nodded reluctantly. "Good." Agatha straightened up, trying to regain control of the situation. "Miss Fort does have the right to attend as a shareholder, but that doesn't change the agenda. We are meeting to discuss and approve a new strategy for the company's development, which includes the sale of 3 hotels to the chain." "I apologize, Mrs. Fort." I raised my hand, interrupting her, "but I'd like to present an alternative proposal to the board members first." "We already have an agreed-upon plan," Agatha retorted, "and it doesn't provide for alternatives. As a shareholder with 32% of the votes, I have the right to present my vision." I spoke calmly but firmly. "I'm sure the board members are interested in considering all possible options for the company." I looked around at those present. Many of them had known me for years, had worked with my father. I saw interest and perhaps hope in their eyes. "This is a waste of time," Agatha raised her voice. "You have 32%, I have 51%. The decision will be made either way." "Maybe," I smiled. "But let's hear all sides first. If your plan is truly the best for the company, you have nothing to fear by comparison." It was a challenge, and Agatha understood that. To refuse me now meant showing my insecurity in front of the board. "You have 5 minutes," she finally hissed. I nodded and rose from my seat. This was my moment, and I had to make the most of it. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, addressing the entire board. "The proposal to sell the 3 hotels in the Fort hospitality chain represents a fundamental departure from the vision of the company's founder, my father, Walter Fort." I paused, letting the words echo in the hearts of those who knew and respected my father. "These hotels aren't just assets on the balance sheet. They are the heart of our company, its history and soul. Selling them would bring short-term gains, but do irreparable damage to the long-term strategy and reputation of the brand." I spread out the prepared charts and financial breakdowns in front of me. Instead, I propose a sustainable growth strategy based on 3 key areas. The first is the modernization of existing hotels with a focus on sustainability and technological innovation. The second is the expansion of services, including the organization of conferences and themed events. The third is geographic expansion through the franchise model, which will allow us to expand the brand with minimal capital expenditure. I outlined each point in detail, backing it up with figures and projections. The board members listened attentively, some taking notes. Even Agatha, despite her obvious irritation, didn't interrupt. In closing, I said as I wrapped up my presentation, I would like to point out that this strategy will not only preserve Walter Fort's legacy, but also provide better long-term returns for all shareholders. Thank you for your attention. I sat back in my seat to the approving whispers of several board members. Agatha looked furious, but controlled herself. Very touching, Meryl, she said with a feigned smile. But business is no place for sentimentality. My plan provides quick and guaranteed profits. Yours is a risky investment with uncertain returns. Risky? I raised an eyebrow. Allow me to disagree. In fact, your plan carries far greater risk, the risk of losing brand identity, key customers, and ultimately market share. That's your opinion, Agatha retorted. And it's irrelevant. I have a controlling interest. About that. I slowly pulled another folder out of my briefcase. There's a point you may not have considered. I opened the folder and laid out the trust agreements on the table. In addition to the 32% held personally by myself and the Fort Revival Foundation, another 9% of the shares are placed in trust for me with voting rights on the board of directors. I watched Agatha do a quick calculation in her mind. 32 plus 9 is 41. Enough for a blocking stake. That means, I continued, that I can block any decision requiring a qualified majority, including the sale of key company assets. Agatha's face contorted with anger. She snatched the documents out of her lawyer's hands, frantically looking through them. That's impossible. When did you have time? Everything is perfectly legal, Ethan replied calmly. The contracts are properly registered. Agatha looked at me with undisguised fury. You can't do this. This is my company now. No, Agatha, I shook my head. It was never your company. It's Walter Fort's company, and it will stay that way. There was a tense silence in the room. The council members glanced around, unsure whose side to take in this confrontation. I move that we put the matter to a vote, finally spoke Frederick Neal, one of the oldest members of the council. We have 2 proposals, Mrs. Fort's plan to sell the hotels and Miss Fort's alternative plan for development. Agatha, realizing she had lost this round, tried to save face. Of course, democracy first. She smiled falsely. Though I think the result is obvious. The vote was a formality. With my 41% and the support of several independent council members, Agatha's plan was rejected and mine was accepted for development. But I wasn't going to stop there. There's one more issue I'd like to raise, I said when the vote was over. The question of the legality of the transfer of the controlling interest to Mrs. Fort after my father's death. Agatha straightened up sharply. That is not up for discussion. The will was notarized. Yes, by one Gerald Beaver, I nodded, who, as it turns out, had business ties to your former insurance company. A surprised whisper swept through the room. Agatha turned pale. That doesn't mean anything. Maybe, I agreed. But there are other oddities, like the fact that the will was made during a period when my father was taking strong drugs that affect mental clarity, or the fact that none of his close friends and business associates knew of his intention to transfer controlling interest to you, not me, as he had always planned. I opened another folder. I have here written testimonies from 5 people, including my father's personal physician, about his condition at the time, as well as a legal opinion on the possibility of contesting the will based on those testimonies. It was a bluff, a partial bluff. The evidence did exist, but the chances of successfully contesting the will were slim. Agatha, however, didn't know that. You're bluffing, she said, but there was no confidence in her voice. Maybe, I shrugged. But are you willing to take the risk? A lawsuit, a public trial, reputational damage to the company, and all this while you're trying to sell the hotels? I don't think potential buyers will be happy to hear about the legal risks. Agatha was silent, feverishly contemplating the situation. I could see in her eyes that she was calculating her options. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "Justice," I answered simply, "and the return of what is rightfully mine." "You want me to just give you controlling interest?" Agatha let out a short laugh. "That's absurd." "Not for free, of course," Ethan interjected. "The Fort Revival Foundation is willing to buy your shares at market value, at a slight premium, given their controlling interest status." Agatha hesitated. I saw a flicker of calculation in her eyes. "What kind of premium?" she asked. 15% over market value," Ethan replied. "That's a very generous offer." 25, Agatha responded immediately. 18, Ethan was adamant. "And we're forgetting about the possibility of contesting the will." Agatha looked at me with undisguised hatred. "You think you've won, don't you?" "I think I'm restoring justice," I replied. "This is my father's company. It should have passed to me." Our gazes crossed in silent confrontation. Then Agatha shifted her gaze to Ethan. 20%, at least." Ethan glanced at me. I nodded faintly. "Agreed," he said. "We'll prepare all the necessary paperwork." "And one more condition," Agatha added. "I want the deal finalized within a week, and until then I remain CEO." "A week is too little time to prepare such a large deal," Ethan objected. 2 weeks minimum." 10 days, Agatha cut him off. "And that's my final word." 10 days, Ethan agreed after a short pause. Agatha stood up abruptly. "In that case, I suggest we consider this meeting adjourned. We all have a lot of work to do." Without waiting for a reply, she gathered her papers and quickly left the room. Noel Busk hurried after her, casting me an unreadable glance. When the door closed behind them, there was silence in the hall. Then Frederick Neal came up to me and shook my hand firmly. "Walter would be proud, Meryl. You are truly his daughter." Other council members surrounded me as well, expressing support and approval. Many of them had long been unhappy with Agatha's management methods, but had not had the opportunity to speak out against her. When Ethan and I finally walked out of the building, I felt the tension of the last few weeks release me. We'd done it. We had gotten the company back. "Congratulations, Miss CEO." Ethan smiled as we got into his car. "It's too early to celebrate," I replied, though I couldn't hold back a smile. "We have a lot of work to do." "Yes, but it will be your job now. The job you've been preparing for your whole life." I nodded, feeling tears come to my eyes. For the first time in a long time, not from grief or anger, but from happiness and relief. "Thank you, Ethan. Without you, none of this would have been possible. I only helped you use your own powers." He squeezed my hand gently. "You did the rest on your own." The next 10 days passed like a blur. The lawyers were preparing documents for the deal, the financiers were doing asset valuations, and I was starting to work on implementing my strategy for the company. Agatha kept a low profile. She still came to the office, but she no longer made any significant decisions. It was clear to everyone that her time was running out. Finally, on the appointed day, we gathered in the same conference room to sign the documents. Agatha looked tense, but kept her tone businesslike. There were no apologies or confessions, just cold calculation. When the last signature was signed, she stood up and walked out of the room without another word. I knew I would never see her again, and frankly, I didn't feel the slightest regret. The next day, I officially took over as CEO of Fort Hospitality. The first thing I did was to gather all of the head office staff. "Many of you have known me since I was a child," I began my speech. "You've seen me grow up with this company. Today begins a new chapter in our history, and I promise you that I will be true to my father's vision of creating not just hotels, but places where people feel at home." The applause that followed my words was heartfelt. I could see the hope in the eyes of people who had worked with my father, who believed in his values. It was happiness or something very close to it. And for a second I thought that my father was now standing next to me, next to these people, and smiling proudly at me.